So good evening, everyone. Good evening. I just want to welcome all those who are with us in the chapel, as well as those of you who are streaming live. We are grateful to our guests for being here today. This is a part of our vocational series and an effort to just give you guys some options and share with you other ways of doing ministry and things that you can do with your wonderful CTS education. One of the things that I have always thought, we here at CTS don't always color in the lines. We like to color outside the lines and go outside of the box, and that is what I love about this community. And so in this workshop, I think you will see some ways that maybe you can envision yourself of doing that and see how others have been able to do that themselves. And so, as always, you are welcome to text, to tweet at CTS Live. And so if there are things that catch your attention, please do tweet those, as well as our online community. If you are streaming, if you have questions and you would like to tweet them, we will read those questions to our panelists. And so at this time, I want to introduce the panelists. We have Reverend Dr. Melbalina Evans, who is the Associate Conference Minister of the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ. She is the Associate Conference Minister of Stewardship and Church Vitality. I will tell you a little bit more in detail about her in a minute, and we have 3 church planters. So we have Neil Ellingson, and remind me, I'm sorry, Tim Kim. Okay, and they are from Root and Branch Church, and they will tell you about themselves. And we have Franshawn Salter, who is a CTS alumni, so we are very glad to have her back. And she is pastor of Anew, and she will tell you about her church. But Reverend Dr. Melbalina Evans is, as I said, in addition to being the Associate Conference Minister of the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ, I am tongue-tied tonight. She has been in ministry for over 35 years. So she was licensed and commissioned at Trinity United Church of Christ. She holds a bachelor's from Northeastern Illinois University, where she graduated summa cum laude. She earned a Master's of Divinity from Howard University Divinity School. She studied CPE at Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C., and then she has her doctorate in ministry from McCormick Theological Seminary. She has won numerous awards for preaching and teaching and has done wonderful things in ministry, and I love her because she is also a member of my home church, Covenant United Church of Christ, as well. So I can attest that she knows what she is talking about. And so I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Evans to get us started. And then we will go to our planters, and then at the end there is a microphone in the back, and so you can ask whatever questions you might have. Okay? Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for the invitation to come and to share with you on this day. And I must express my gratitude to Reverend Goods for the opportunity to be here. To our church planters, I'm happy to see you once again and delight in the fact that we share in ministry in the Illinois Conference. To you who have gathered, I thought that we would begin by talking about new church plants. And I have experienced new church plants occur in perhaps 3 different ways. And because we are in ministry, I'd like to share with you that new church plants began when God places a vision in the heart of an individual or a group of individuals for the development of a community of faith who will then receive the charge to care for and to feed God's sheep. Secondly, an existing congregation might be engaged in evangelism, and they might identify the need for the development of another congregation to meet the needs of those in another geographic area or community. Thirdly, churches who disband or dissolve their ministry often gift their property either directly or indirectly by gifting to the conference or their denominational office their properties, their facilities, their ministry items for the creation of a new community of faith. And then fourthly, denominational leaders might develop a new church plant. They might do that by discovering the opportunity, by looking at demographics. Perhaps it is word of mouth. Perhaps it is an approach by someone. But often we then proceed with that opportunity for church growth. Sometimes we repurpose a gifted facility. Sometimes we collaborate with either an existing congregation, we collaborate across denominations, we collaborate with those individuals or that group who determine that God has given them the vision for creating a community of faith. So when we look at church plants, I believe that the church plant begins with a location in the heart of the visionary leader that has been called to the ministry of planting seeds. Secondly, the location arrives in the desires of people who acknowledge God and want to grow in their relationship to God. There are opportunities, and yes, there are challenges. I noticed that we were to address best practices, and so I will simply give you my first best practice for church plants, and that is prayer and discernment. There are opportunities for funding, and we will talk about those, I believe, as we get further into our conversation. But thank you for your attention, and I hope that we will be able to address some of the concerns that you have brought today.
So I'm going to go to Franchon.
Well, my name is Franchon Salter, and I pastor a new church which officially launched in March of 2013. And I will tell you that a new church and the desire and the passion to start a new church did not come without much prayer and without much conversation with not just Reverend Evans and with Reverend Powers, but also with the conference minister, Reverend Jorge Morales, as well. And it was something that was not, I did not take lightly, and it was over a period of several years that I had been in conversation and in a period of discernment and prayer concerning what I felt called to do and how to do it. And after much prayer and affirmation from what I call my bosses, we launched a new church. And today, I feel like we're still becoming what God has called us to be. And I felt a real strong calling to reach those outside of the church walls and go into the communities where I won't call them unchurched, but where folk who had not been to church or had not never been to church, in my case, in many years or even at all, to discover ways of being church and helping them to feel a part and engaged in a ministry where they could just be who they are. And I look at my calling into ministry, and in particularly as a pastor of a new church, as creating opportunities to provide tools and resources to assist people to become who God called them to be. I can't make folk do anything, but I can certainly use the Word of God and encouragement to help them to become and discover what God has called them to be, to discover their purpose. And that's what we do at a new church.
Can you share the location of your church?
We are everywhere. So currently we're worshiping in Roseland, and most, if not all, of our outreach is in the Roseland-Pullman area. But when I say we are everywhere, I say that jokingly, but not really, because my vision for ministry is a vision that's vast. Because I think the same demographic of folk that God has called us to minister to in Roseland exists all over this world, all over this city, all over this country. And so my vision for ministry is to reach as many people as we can for the glory and kingdom of God.
Amen. So, Neil and Tim, would you tell us about Root and Branch and also where you're located and about yourselves?
Sure. I'll start. My name is Neil Ellingson, and I am a graduate of University of Chicago Divinity School, but I took some classes here, including UCC History and Polity, because I'm on the ordination track in the United Church of Christ. The idea for the church plant was one of the things we like to say about Root and Branch is that we are a community. A lot of churches say that it's okay to believe different things, or we're a place where difference or diversity is respected. But then you go there and maybe in spite of their best intentions, there's still sort of one way that is the way things are done. At Root and Branch, we really try to ritualize and incarnate and have practices that make opportunities for those differences, for conversation, for dialogue, for different perspectives to emerge. Like, that's something we think a lot about and are intentional about creating a space for. So what I was going to say is that the reason for creating this church in the first place, I might give a different reason than Tim, so I'm curious what he would say. But we, classmates, dreamed about a place that in some ways we would want to go. I grew up in a secular family, sort of followed friends to churches here and there, but didn't have any sort of deep formational religious upbringing, and kind of came to it later as an adult after college, kind of through what I would call a conversion experience, but one that I didn't know what to do with at first, and it took me a while to find the church. But I liked things about lots of different churches, but I didn't feel like any were ones where I could call home. And I know it's not supposed to be super easy. I know like the Christian life is supposed to be one where we're challenged, and it's not just a consumer choice, but at the same time, I felt like I could imagine a church where I would feel more at home, but it didn't quite exist, or I saw bits of it here, bits of it there. So Tim has a different background that he can tell you in a minute, but we started talking and dreaming, and somehow we had a third co-founder who's kind of leaving his role in ministry and doing more academic stuff, but suddenly this thing we had talked about as a dream a few things fell into place, and it seemed like, is this really going to happen? Can we really, and it's true, the money thing is part of it. It's like, can we do this? Can we like spend enough time on this to make it real? Can it be a job? So that was really exciting, but we both had other part-time jobs. We're still both technically kind of part-time, not quite full-time, and we didn't do this sort of safe, I don't know if there is a safe option today in the in ministry, I probably shouldn't say that, but we did the really risky one, but it's paid off because I was going to let Tim maybe talk more about what Root and Branch looks like, and the video will show that too, but I can't imagine doing anything else, even with all this stress. It's so exciting. You can be creative. I think it can be really wonderful, but also has a lot of frustrations to come into an existing place and try to change the culture, even when people say they want to, right? I've heard just so many stories. Even when that's down to one person, you'd be surprised there are a bunch of churches with kind of with one person, and they say they want to change. Anyways, the video maybe will speak for itself. Do you want to say a little bit?
Yeah, my name is Tim. I wanted to say that for me, and this is just to be very frank and honest, like I kind of don't like church. This calling for myself, if you want to call it that, it's a bit like Jonah in some ways, and so like I grew up in the evangelical church, non-denominational, sort of what you imagine with like rock bands and very conservative politics and all that kind of stuff. And when I left that church, I would go to these mainline churches with more, theologically and politically more aligned with my beliefs, but they were just so boring. And the people there, I just had no I couldn't relate to them at all. It's like, just to be frank, like just a lot of old white people, right? And I was like, I don't really know how to, I don't really feel home here. And the music was like different and all that kind of stuff. So it's like I had no home for myself, right? And so when Neil says we kind of started this to like or make a place that we would want to go, like that's super true for me. I was like, okay, I could either do this or maybe I just like won't go to church anymore because I can't really find a place for me. So that was part of the motivation. And it's not, the evangelical church, for all their issues or whatever you want to call them, one thing they do very well is that they plant all the time. It's like the norm for them, right? And so growing up, planting was like not strange at all. My parents planted a church, like everyone, like basically all these pastors I knew all planted. And so it was just like when I was like talking to Neil in divinity school, and I was like, we should just plant a church. Like it wasn't like, oh my God, this is like a crazy endeavor. It was just like felt really natural to me. I only discovered that it was weird when we started telling like our colleagues in our cohort or in the ministry, and they're like, why would you do that? Oh my God. And I was like, oh, it must be an anomaly here. But for me, it wasn't. So it was a natural thing. We wanted to create this space that both, like Neil was saying, had this open-minded, not just in concept and vision, but also in the liturgy and how we actually did stuff, but also culturally spoke to my aesthetic sensibilities, the kind of music we do, and the way that we preach, the way that we sort of make the space look, and all that kind of stuff. So, by and large, as you'll see in this video, our churches ranges basically from around like 22 to like 34. Basically, everybody is in that range, all young. Unfortunately, we're not super culturally diverse, and I would be glad to speak on why I think that is, if you want to ask me. But the church is in a strong way a reflection, I think, of who we are as people, and they're people I can relate to, and they're both parishioners and friends, and so it's been a really rewarding experience in that way, and glad to have started this church, but also find a church that speaks to me and feels like home as well. So I don't think that's a selfish motivation when you're doing it. It's like you gotta create what you believe is gonna speak to you, and not like try to like do it for people in your mind who you think will be a target audience. Like, you create your own thing, And if you believe like there are people out there like you, which we did, then they'll come. So
Yeah. I should say that we got generous support and both like spiritually in prayer, but also financial from the Christian Church Disciples of Christ denomination. So I'm sort of seeking dual standing. And our third compadre, he's from that denomination. We are strongly ecumenical in spirit. Like when we think about how to like theological perspective, but also like liturgical stuff, we want to draw from what we like about lots of different strands of Christianity, but also it's reflected in the background of where people are coming from. So both the disciples and the UCC, that's sort of in their DNA, and it's a really good fit for what we're doing. So yeah, we do. It's like funny because we talk a big game about how we're doing something new and different, but like the more you read about these old denominations, the more you realize how they were doing that hundreds of years ago, and really radical things at the time. And it's been inspiring to kind of dig more into that past, and humbling. So it's not good to think you're, reinventing everything and the best thing from it. Show the video. Sounds good.
So yes, we.
It feels really old school to me to be like, hey, here's tradition, and now you're responsible for making this tradition your own. And that's really a thing that happens here. And so it's not this passive, like, do I agree or disagree with this thing that's being spoken to me? But it's like, what am I contributing, and how do I contribute to this community, and how, and I feel like in a lot of ways, like, we kind of change each other. Like, I feel like it's a place where people really listen.
I was new to Chicago about 6 months for grad school, and in February I was just very sad and very alone, and I had come to Chicago knowing that I was looking for a church community, but I didn't really know what I wanted that to look like. I had tried out in evangelical churches and Episcopalians, and each of them had elements that I loved, but none of them had the whole thing.
It's very open. It's open to people from different backgrounds, and I really appreciate that. And it's open to interpretation and understanding kind of some of these tenets of religion that carry forward into our everyday lives. I grew up in the church, which I definitely value. And after some reflection, I think I'm pretty lucky in the sense that I was rooted in that Sunday experience, getting that, but it never truly connected with me or had that meaning that I think I was seeking and yearning.
As I went down to the river to pray, studying about that good old day, and who shall wear the starry crown? Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, sisters, let's go down, let's go down, come on down.
I can say that I've never been more connected to church people than I have at Root and Branch. I grew up in the church, in the evangelical church, and even though we were always church people, my mom was a children's pastor, I was always very well known. Root and Branch asks us to have really authentic, very personal conversations with strangers.
I think there's something about eating with folks that does a lot of things that are a lot of intangible things like trust and community.
It's a way to be creative. It's a way to be yourself and find an area that fascinates you or interests you, whether that be eating good food and taking in some amazing talks and some amazing discussions, or actually contributing through song and music, or cooking a meal, playing in a band.
I like that people make the food and they try their best to make it, and and everybody will like it, and some people won't, and they'll just try all the food.
So I grew up in the quote-unquote heartland, and everybody went to church, and I didn't. And I felt like there was something wrong with me. And so people made fun of me for not going to church. And that was like a very intense feeling of there's something wrong with me and I have to fix this. So I remember that I tried to read the Bible when I was a kid. And I sat down and I read chapter 1 of Genesis, and I couldn't get anything out of it. And I tried and I tried and I tried, and I prayed to God. And I said, I've read your book, and it's okay so far. And that's all I felt. Now I'm a part of Root and Branch, and I think that it's a community that allows me to explore those things without making me fit into some type of box that makes me feel like there's something wrong with me. I don't fit. I feel like I fit in this community.
I was raised in a Christian church, Protestant, and it always was very meaningful to me. And I continued to be involved in church for most of my life, but in college had a kind of typical time of attrition where I didn't go to church, and then really wanted to come back into the Christian tradition.
I grew up going to church. My family's very involved in church. We're Pentecostal, evangelical Pentecostal holiness, which is a little stew of conservative Pentecostal folks. And so I was, for like 18 years in church 7 days a week, and that is actually not an exaggeration. And it was it was really important to my family, and so it was really important to me. But our church didn't do a good job of talking about the ways that those things can be harmful, and I was feeling harmed by a lot of the things that were being preached and the things that I was finding in Scripture, and I was like, it didn't feel safe.
We meet.
And so I'd like to ask our panelists to talk a little bit about resources. Reverend Evans, about what the association, what the conference does for people who want to plant, and then if each of you could kind of share your experience and what you needed and how you got the things that you needed to be able to get started in your planning process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When persons approach either the association or the conference office and express their desire to become a new church planter, of course, there are a series of conversations that we have with them, and we have to assess what the need is. In the United Church of Christ, there are different sources of funding, and we have access to those funds based upon what it is that has been presented as the vision for that church, what the goals are that have been identified for shaping this new ministry that is going to emerge. In the United Church of Christ, the association has the responsibility for authorizing the ministry and also for granting standing for a church, a new church, as well as for a new minister. And let's assume that it is a student who is coming out of seminary that wants to develop a new church start. So there is a relationship with the association as well as with the conference. There are occasions wherein new church start planters may be seeking a space wherein they will gather folk for the experience of worshiping, for Bible studies, for small groups. And so they may come asking what kind of facility or what kind of places, where are the churches are that might be welcoming. And so we have to explore, we do explore the targeted population. We do explore that vision that the pastor has. We do ask where it is they see themselves being located. And so we talk about the facility and how they will begin their ministry. And some ministries will actually start in very unusual places. Unusual being that I think of ministry starting in Starbucks. Starbucks is a great place. It has a very welcoming environment. It's very informal, and so people might gather at a Starbucks to have religious conversation. That could be the beginning of a new church start. People might also gather in someone's home to have conversation around the table, to discuss religious topics of the day. But what we want to do is to help not direct the vision, but to facilitate that which is emerging from that new church start pastor or that group of persons. We want to facilitate not only the facility wherein they will gather, we want to help them make connections with other congregations. For some churches might be nesting congregations. They might find a place within an existing congregation. And so we want to really promote that new church start as it comes into being. We do have sources of funding that are available. We are typically looking for the new church start to have a ministry team. We really are looking for a combination of those persons that can work together to support the vision that has been cast, to develop a ministry, to call other persons into relationship with Christ and with that church that is emerging. And so there are resources on our national level from the United Church of Christ, resources from the conference in the United Church of Christ, and resources across sister churches.
So can you guys speak to your planning process and what resources you had?
I was very blessed in that I was able to, what Reverend Evans called nest at a church where I had previously served as assistant pastor for many years. And I was able to nest there and actually could still be nesting there if that was my choice for a couple of years. Problem was, for me, I had folk coming from my target area, which is Roseland, West Pullman, to Hyde Park, which is not a bad thing. But I really wanted to be full-time in Roseland and in West Pullman because that's where I felt like the ministry need was and the ministry opportunity. I was also very blessed because the conference as well as the association has been very supportive of the vision for a new church and gave me everything that I needed to become functional and to do ministry within my first year. So we were able to get all of the sound equipment that we needed. We were able to pay the rent. We gave our musicians donations. We were able to pay people and pay for office space. So I was very blessed to have that opportunity and that kind of support from the conference as well as the association.
So we, as Neil mentioned before, we went to the Disciples of Christ, Illinois, Wisconsin region, and pitched them this vision that we had, which was, I don't know if a lot of people think about this when they think about church planting, but we put together like a business plan basically, and it's very, when church people think about this kind of stuff, it's usually like very like emotional and hard. It's like, no, this is like a 3-year budget and like you were saying, like a demographic study and all this kind of stuff. Along, of course, with like the vision that we had for how God was going to move in this church. And so we came with that, and they have been super supportive. They've funded a great deal of our ministry for the past 3 years, and this year are continuing to also fund. The funding level keeps changing and that sort of thing, as it should, but without them, we would have had to drastically alter the way that we do things. I think it depends really on sort of what you're trying to achieve here, and I think that's what the denomination also looks at. If the goal is to like, we're going to do like a church at a bar, and it's going to be a small group, and we're going to hang out, like, not a lot of money is necessary for that. Or if you're trying to build something that it's a bigger thing, and it's sort of a model for other churches in the future, then that's what we were kind of after, and so they were willing to support us at a higher level. But yeah, I think that's, for us, we didn't get MBAs or go to like nonprofit training school and stuff. So a lot of that has been the hardest part to like do. But I do think that it's really necessary to have somewhat of a business mentality when approaching for funding. When you go to funder, we also have individual funders. We've raised probably in the last 3 years something like 20 to 30,000 from individual donors, just like my brother who supports us in other contexts we've had. We've had fundraisers. So outside church funding has been vital for us as well, and that's an area I think that a lot of churches don't think about. We still think about the model in terms of like offering and then maybe some denomination support, but there's a lot of funding out there if you know where to look and have a vision to pitch that people catch on to. So think about who in your life has got some money, can write you that big check, be an angel donor. Urban Village, which is a church that I used to work at, and you guys might know, worships in this space. When they started out, they had a couple people who put down some fat donations for them to get started. So that stuff can happen. I think we got to look over there as well.
Yes.
Well, I'll say one thing, since you brought up Urban Village. I think it's a challenge that, we should be honest about that. The other side of the wonderful polity that the UCC and the disciples have of congregational polity does present some challenges for church planting in this era, I think, because I've seen how, like the Methodists, for example, or denominations with a little more hierarchical, centralized polity structure can have more of what I would say like a strategy and also like a big pool of resources, and kind of we've been very blessed, but I know that it's that can be tough, and it can also mean that we had to figure out how to do a lot of stuff on our own. Like Urban Village, they had like a lot of things that they had the denomination take care of. We had to train ourselves like to be admin, or what tax, IRS, like all that stuff, right? Like so that's all real. That's like a lot of work. And it's not the work that you imagine when you're like, I've got this amazing idea and I just want to reach people and bring God into their lives. It's like, then you're like, how do you fill out the 501c3?
I hate QuickBooks. It's like I never thought I'd be on QuickBooks so much in my life,
But that's another thing. If you want to start a church, I think you do need to at least sort of being a jack of all trades. They say that about ministry in general, but like I made this video, I didn't know how to make a video. I'd never made a video before. And we have to, think about admin. When it's just, you're not going to have a staff, basically.
Yes.
So let's field some questions.
There is a question behind you. Reverend Rosemary.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I drove all the way from Gurnee because I went on a venture 5 years ago. I left my Baptist church in downtown Evanston, And I was always driving from Gurnee, because that's where I lived, to Evanston 2, 3, 4 times a week. And when my transition came to move on from Second Baptist Church after being there for about 20 years, graduated, ordained into gospel ministry, but graduated from Garrett, God led me, after being still for about 5 years, God led me to start a church in the Gurnee area. I did not learn anything about starting a church in seminary, so it has been a rough road, to say the least. We started meeting in a hotel. We continue to meet in a hotel, the Hampton Inn, right near the Golden Corral. And we have basically a grassroots organization. Started with a Bible study first at the Holiday Inn. And then as we did that for about a year, and then I was led to move on and just kind of officially start the church. We got 501c3. So God sent some people who were gifted, for example, in like CFAs, those who know how to do money, and they helped us with preparing that 3-year budget and submitting and getting the 501c3 tax exemption, all of that. So my question, I have found and learned all the errors that I've made. Number one, not starting with a team. Mm-hmm. You really need a team. Now, God has sent a team. Mm-hmm. I have a few people who are working with me and to help move it along, but not starting with a team was one of the biggest errors I feel that I made. And when I started, I was bivocational. Yes. So I did not go out and reach out for a lot of funds, but I will say we've averaged, I'm just putting numbers out here, probably about $50,000 a year for the past 5 years. That's not very much, but that's what we've averaged over 5 years with tithes, offerings, and various donations. We've had as many as 120 people join, but we don't have that many right now because it's been transient because of the area we live in. Yeah. We live near Great Lakes Naval Base. Mm-hmm. So we've had people come join us for the season that they're in, you know, the area, and then they move on, they get transferred, etc. So and then we've had people who work in corporate America, because in that area there's the Abbott, there is Takeda Pharmaceuticals, some of the companies I've worked for, and Walgreens headquarters, etc., as Stella. So we're in an area where people move, corporate folks move, and then they move out. So at this juncture, after 5 years, we've done a number of things and connected with the community. I feel stuck. Number one, I thought that I could underwrite a lot because I'm single, I had a good job. I lost that job. So I have not been gainfully, I've had some part-time jobs, gainfully employed for the past 3 years. I've been working part-time gigs. Well, I was able to do a lot more, support of our congregation to help pay for the ministry of music, etc. Well, okay, so that's not working very well right now because I can give the very bare minimum. So I'm wondering, for someone like myself, I'm not affiliated with a denomination that provides support. The other lesson I've learned is that I want to do this full time, and it's now the question is, how do I find resources so that I can live, take care of myself as well, and focus on, doing the church planting, moving it forward, trying to take it to the next level, because without those resources to take care of the pastor and members of the team, it's like really, really difficult to move forward and to stay focused. It's very hard. I thought, I'm bivocational, No, it's hard to be bivocational. This work is so It's a lot. And even with a team, it's a lot. It really requires your full time. So anyway, I said a lot, but the question I'm asking is about resources for someone who is not affiliated with, and I'm open to being affiliated with a Christian denomination, but right now I'm not. The Baptist Church does not, unfortunately. My church is supportive, and they might give me funds, but they're not going to support me on a long-term basis or provide the kind of funding that, the UCC or Disciples of Christ denomination might provide. So I'm just curious about any other resources of funding that you might recommend. Any other insights you might share with me? We're just trying to move the church to the next level and trying to reach folks in that Gurnee Lake County area.
So as you were talking, and what I'm about to say is the lessons that I've learned church planting, and this is my second time around church planting. I church planted, everybody close your ears, over 20 years ago, and it was much different than church planting now. And so I think that if you just think about what it is you want to do, which you already know, right? And then not so much think about it in terms of church. I think we have to expand the way we think about ministry and the way we think about doing ministry, and then create those opportunities, create those creative funding opportunities for ourselves. But as long as, I think sometimes we kind of, what they say, cut your nose to spite your face.
Yes.
Because we put ourselves in these boxes with this perimeter about what we can and cannot do, because this is church, and church got to be this way. We got to have that chicken dinner on Sundays, and this is what we got to do, right? But I think that if we can just broaden our minds and open our minds up. So I come from the world of not-for-profits, right? And so, that's my bivocational job, and I've been doing that for over 20 years. And so in that same frame of being in my work, it has helped me to think more entrepreneurial, because I've created things from nothing in my work, and also been able to think more creatively about how to raise money. And I've actually witnessed folk raise a whole bunch of money in just a few hours. And so it's just being creative in terms of how we think about raising money, and also opening our minds up to avail ourselves of the resources that's available to us. And we could talk more after this. I could give you something more concrete.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A question. First year student here. I'm originally from an area, deep South Texas, but there's no UCC there. So the closest one is about 3 hours away. So it's not like most of us are going to drive. And there's a big chunk of LGBT community there. There's one non-denomination church there who was started by the LGBT community. However, a lot of LGBT folks won't go there because the clergy have not had any theological studies, training, nothing. So my thing is, it's in the back of my mind right now because I don't know what God will pull me towards. But in the potential that I would return home and want to plant a church, well, it would be UCC. My other concern, I guess, in trying to do that is that the disciples in that area are very anti-LGBT. Mm-hmm. So I spent the last year with Disciples of Christ, and at first they stated they were open and affirming. Come to find out, the denomination does not recognize that congregation as open and affirming because they haven't gone through the process. So when I tried bringing it up to the pastor, it was a no-go. It is what it is. There's 30 other ministries you can worry about. And then it was brought up to me that, we were questioned as to why we're supporting you. So, because I'm part of the LGBT community. And I took it upon myself to go to Des Moines out of my pocket. So I understand where some of it, you gotta spend your own to Des Moines to do the Building Inclusive Church. So it's a little disappointing to go from that workshop and you get all riled up. You're like, hey, I have the tools to try to make it open affirming. So I didn't go. So anyways, I know you all were saying you were trying to get double standing, right? So in that scenario where it's at least a 3-hour radius, where you don't have that support to try to be inclusive of everybody, what would you suggest?
We're talking about developing a community of faith over a large geographic area. And so if there is no existing congregation that ministers to this particular community, people that affirm LGBT and Q, there are some ways to reach out, for people, because I think that I'm a Callahan devotee. And so he says what you want to do is to be willing to put yourself in a community and fall in love with them and allow them to fall in love with you. Here, people will drive more than 2 hours to get to the church of their choice. Mm-hmm. In Chicago, I've seen it happen, and it's not limited to Chicago. People will bypass church after church after church to get to that one place that ministers to their need and wherein they feel welcomed. And so I don't think the issue is the 3-hour limitation, provided there's some transportation. And if there is no transportation, then I think you want to begin to use media to help bridge the gap, so that you have use of social media and you can have services that are streamed out. You can certainly have invite people to listen in to a Bible study that you might offer. There are many different ways that you can use technology, if that's available, to reach out. The other strategy that I've seen work, and I was recently in Angola, and there pastors serve 4 different churches. One pastor I met served 7 different churches. There's a heavy reliance upon effective and empowered lay leadership, and the formally trained pastor might be a circuit pastor. Reverend Powers, you were present, and I don't know if you'd like to speak to that.
Thank you very much, my sister. I think that what she was saying is absolutely true. What we would call here satellite churches. Mm-hmm. So the church that's 3 hours away, talk to them about the community that's there 3 hours from them, but that's needing their theological, spiritual, financial resources to become the whole people of God. And have that trained pastor impart some of his or her wisdom and knowledge to you so that you can start the satellite. And this pastor will be able to keep you up with theological training until you have completed yours. Mm-hmm. So she's absolutely right. In Angola, it works wonderfully.
Yes.
They have over 2,100 churches
Yes.
and about 200 pastors.
Yes.
So if you don't want to do it here, got some place for you in Angola for you to go to. But we need to be thinking creatively.
Yes.
And we need to be thinking differently than, okay, this is where I am. They don't have a church that speaks to me, so what am I going to do? Start one. Talk to the person 3 hours away and say, this is a vision that I have. Can you all share in this vision?
Yeah.
It's about vision. It's about being creative. And do it. You're here. I'm here. I'm going to keep an eye on you.
Can I add something real quick to that? I also would encourage you, and maybe this isn't a direction you're interested in, but just because your passion is around forming a community where LGBT folks are genuinely welcome and where that's like a proud, like clear part of the identity of the community, that I wouldn't necessarily limit or limit before the fact the imagined possibilities of that community as being just appealing to LGBT people, because I think for a lot of progressive or more open-minded people, that issue is a huge part of why they don't like a lot of existing churches. Whether and maybe they have gay friends, maybe they don't, maybe it's just important to them. And I think that can be a strong part of the identity of a community, and it can still have appeal beyond that. So the way I heard you talking about it was like, okay, I'm going to be the church for the gay people in this area. It's like, well, maybe there are a lot more people there that want to be part of that too.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of it, talking with other people is like divorcees or people who are in their second or third marriage don't necessarily feel welcome in mainline churches. So, I mean, yes, I usually say LGBT because that's, usually what more people talk about. Sure. But in that area, it's just, it's hardcore. So, and that's why we moved, is one, so I could be here physically and be face-to-face in my classes and have more interaction and learn more hands-on, so that if God still calls me to go back home and start a church, I have more tools and resources.
So I was born and raised in the Baptist church.
Yes.
And as the old folks say, I'm Baptist born and Baptist bred, and when I'm dead, I'll be
Baptist dead.
right. But after being ordained and serving for almost 25, maybe almost 30 years, I've come to really appreciate what it means to outgrow a church. And so I've been searching, right? I'm in the polity class right now, and I like a lot of what I've seen. John Thomas is absolutely phenomenal in terms of just conveying the history, and it's so rich. But obviously there are a lot of issues too. For me, though, it's a question of both wanting to pursue dual tracks and at the same time not really knowing yet whether or not I am a church planter or if in fact I just want to be ordained and carry both ordinations. And so could you talk a little bit about just the process of ordination, and then whether or not in the planting piece of it all, you have to be ordained UCC before you can do the plant? I mean, can you just talk about the semantics of that?
Oh, I'll be happy to enlist my sister once again. And I do so because in our denomination, it is the association that actually ordains. The authority for ordination rests or resides in the association office. And so I am going to invite Reverend Powers to share her wisdom regarding the ordination.
Thank you. I think I heard you say you are ordained. Okay. Okay. In the Chicago Metropolitan Association, if you have been ordained by an association or a denomination, then we would honor that, and we would ask you to be on a track that we call privilege of call or dual standing. And those two tracks are pretty similar. With privilege of call, that would necessitate you giving up what you already have. It takes about a year to walk through that whole process, maybe a little bit longer. But we ask you to do the church and history polity. We ask you to take boundary training. We ask you to come have a conversation with us, write a couple of papers, so that we can get a feel for who you are, where you are, and you can get a feel for who we are particularly. And privilege of call would afford you the opportunity to look and search for a congregation within the United Church of Christ. Once you have answered a call or accepted a call in the United Church of Christ, then after a year, you would receive what we call full standing. And that would mean that you would have all the rights, privileges, obligations, duties, everything that a born and bred ordained UCC person would have. We're not going to kill you off yet. And you would give up your Baptist standing. The second one is dual standing. That would allow you the opportunity to pastor or work in a UCC church or affiliated institution, and for as long as you are there, you will have standing. Once you leave that, you no longer have UCC standing. And if you were to come back at a later date to do another call in a UCC church or institution, you would have to go through the whole process all over again. So those are the two differences. So that would apply to you. And that's handled through the association, through what we call our church and ministry team. And there are about 27 people on that team that would have a final conversation with you about what your goals and desires are. So that's kind of the down and dirty fast. Come see me, second floor.
Any other questions?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Harlette Washington. I am an MDiv student here at CTS. And as I listen at the excitement of new church start and church plantings, I'm also curious about future visioning, because one day you will perhaps be that stable, long-standing, now the traditional church that people are looking for, because now 30 years down the road, there you are, a seasoned, a very mature, wise person. Do you see any way of incorporating on how worship and ministry continues that could assure you 30 years from now that that same heartbeat is still there? I know that's asking a lot, but it's one of the things as I've looked at ministry today, there was not enough future visioning for when we reach this decade, and then 2 more decades past there, and then when we're all as gray-haired as I am, what will church look like? will we still have the drive to evangelize? Will we still have the energy to embrace young people and their thoughts and where they are as you are now? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that for me the answer is something, and I hope this isn't discouraging to your hope, but that churches now can't think that way or shouldn't think that way as we used to, which is to say something like, we are building, in my opinion, a way of doing church in this moment that speaks to people in this moment. Mm-hmm. The idea that we're building some sort of institution or something lasting forever, I think, would eventually get us to a place where, if we're around 20 years down the line, then we're sort of grasping at something that's no longer there. And I don't want to be in that position. I think new churches have to have a mentality that if you do something and it blesses people for 10 years and then it's not working anymore, then the Lord has done their work, His work, God's work, and it's okay if you got to let it go. I'm not trying to build like a brick and mortar steeple thing that's going to be around, and I think that for me, the hope is when I get older, I'm in a place where I'm wise enough to know that I'm no longer at the forefront of the church. I can mentor people and love them and minister to them, but I'm not there anymore to be like, this is how you should do it. Because I won't know at that point. I'm not cool. I won't be cool anymore like I am right now. So that's my mentality with it. I feel extremely blessed to be doing this right now, and I really believe that what we're doing is super important. And for the time that it is capturing that moment, I will be thankful for it. But I hold it a little loosely as well, because I know that we're entering the Wild West here. We don't know what's going to happen with our denominations, all these buildings. So yes, it's hard to think of it that way, and I wish that it wasn't so. But that's I think a necessary way for me to look at it, at least.
Just keep in mind that I wasn't talking in terms of structure, but just what you've said.
Sustainability, you said. Are you talking more so in terms of sustainability?
Sustainability of the mission.
Yeah. Yes.
I think one of the things too is just continuing, just like how, for example, with the church that I've started, trying to be creative and innovative in terms of what we do, and listening to people and letting them know it's okay to do church differently from how we learned to do it when we were younger. And so when they see that, today people do Bible study on Periscope. And so, the church can do that. The method may change, but the message will remain the same. And so I think when we continue to show people it's okay, and then we model that for them, and they're empowered to think out of the box in doing ministry, that creates that environment for sustainability and an environment where the vision for, being open to how God might move, depending on the era you're living in.
One thing, I would love to be I maybe think about this. Well, I think about this maybe a little different from Tim, which is I would love to be, and maybe this is part of because I'm entering a new phase of my life. I just had a son 6 months ago, and a family. I'm kind of growing up, and I would love to be a kind of boring but thriving church someday that supports. We've been lucky not just to get denominational support, but we've been supported in various ways from two very healthy, vibrant UCC churches in the Chicago area. First Congregational Glen Ellen out in the burbs where I did an internship, and St. Paul's UCC in Lincoln Park has helped us, and so like they're doing their thing and they're doing it well. It's going well, but they also see the value in what we're doing. And I think that's one way to like keep that like openness to, whoa, some new people are coming up and maybe we have resources we can help them. I think that's one way it happens. The other thing is, I want to just like a little genealogy of some of what we do, and we didn't talk a lot about it, but kind of the heartbeat of, or the liturgical heartbeat of what we do is this dinner church, and where we're not just having like church and then a meal, a potluck, where the service happens around the dinner table, and the whole thing is communion, and we sing around the table, we talk around the table, the sermon happens around the table. That idea came, a lot of that idea came from a church out in San Francisco called, people have been, that idea came from Jesus, just to be clear, or the Jews before that, but in terms of the last several decades, like doing this in a kind of finding innovative ways of doing church, St. Gregory of Nyssa, which is in San Francisco, used that as part of the way they formed. They now have a big, beautiful building. I've been out there to visit, but food is very central to what they do. That inspired a church out in Brooklyn called St. Lydia's. Pastor Emily Scott is there. I've been up to visit. Other guy who started this with us, Andrew, had seen it. So we stole that idea, so St. Gregory of Nyssa was a kind of young, hip, new church in the 80s or whenever they were starting. St. Lydia's in Brooklyn has been around maybe 7 years now, we're 3 years. Like, these ideas, I would love to become the kind of continuation of what they were. They're not... What I'm saying is, like, being cool is, there are a lot of old cool people. There are a lot of old, you seem to be one of them. There are a lot of old people who, maybe it's just the packaging is not, all that said, though, like, the mainline or progressive Christianity is in a pretty crappy position right now. Like, there's like this, which I'm not scared of. I think it's exciting. It's an opportunity. But like, things are the heyday of like exuberant church expansion and stuff isn't going on. So I think what Tim's saying, that like it's hard to imagine, it's hard to think 30 years down the road. I think for a lot of people in this world. One strange thing that I've encountered is some of my mentors who I love and I think are so great were kind of baffled about the idea of church planting. This is like a difference, Tim was talking about, in the evangelical world, that's how you do it. I think that needs to change. So like, maybe in 30 years from now, I hope I'm not a mainline person who's like, has a mentee and I'm like, church planting? You sure you want to do that? Like, there's this great church out here that you could, or like, there's this place here. Or like their first sort of impulse is to be like, you sure about that? And I think, I hope that I still have that heart for it.
Could I just add something? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, please.
Just if I may have a quick rant here, which is that I think it's a misconception that the form of a church or worship is what's going to save the church. It's like, theology on tap, we're meeting at bars. People like bars, we're going to do that. Or like even dinner church, which we do and we believe in as like a really cool way of doing church. We get a lot of questions asked of us, like, tell us about dinner church. Like, is dinner church going to be the future? It's like, I don't think so. Like, it's cool and people should do it more, but like, it's not the saving model. Or like, if we do church on the internet, that's the future. I don't think that form is actually like, it's not about that. People actually like getting together in person like people do at church and hanging out. Like, that's a core human value. And so it's always going to be there. The issue, I think, is more, are we theologically innovative? Are we innovative in the way that we think about how God is speaking to the questions we have today? Which is what I mean about me sort of, as I get older, that's going to change for me. My questions won't be the questions of the culture as much anymore, and I won't be able to think about those questions as well. But I think that's a really important part. Are you personally wrestling with how God is speaking to you as a person in 2016? And if you're not, if you're sort of like, all the stuff that I heard growing up is like fine with me and it's what speaks to me, like, it'll be hard to then be like, my message is for non-church or unchurched people or people out there. Unless we're wrestling ourselves and thinking of new ways to talk about God, it's not going to be relevant. The relevance is not about the bar.
And that doesn't go just for church planting. It's just, I mean, because the whole thing about the movement Jesus started was like talking about something strange and new and unfamiliar to people. And that, I think, should always be what Christians are doing. They should always be looking at the gospel, looking at these stories as strange and new and unfamiliar, and assuming that it's part of our vocation to tell that story, not just in new ways, but tell that story to people who haven't heard that story and are going to need to hear it in new ways. I think even times, like, a lot of people who've been like faithful church members for 30 years need to hear it done in new ways.
Reverend Evans, you had...
I would like to add that the opportunity that we have to look out 30 years ahead resides in our ability to relate to young people. You know, it is the youth to whom we must tell the story, as well as those who are adults and seniors. But it's the young people. Without the young people, there will be no church. There will not be a church. And so here in Illinois, we are blessed that we also have outdoor camping programs. You know, we have an opportunity to take children out and help them discover ways of thinking about God. We have the opportunity to take young people who have not heard the story and share the story with them. You know, but church neglects on occasion the youth. And we cannot do that because that will ensure our own demise.
And to that end, a new church, the reason why I was so anxious to get to Roseland is it's a marginalized community. And I knew that for me, church is not about me preaching, right? It's about service. Mm-hmm. It's about the work. It's about how we serving God's people. How are we empowering God's people? How are we providing tools and resources to God's people? How are we allowing for opportunities for people to become what God created them to become? And so I was anxious to get to Roseland. I couldn't get there fast enough, right? But it's like, but Roseland, because it is so marginalized, it has a whole different set of circumstances. And so we had to go in listening, right? And so when I think about sustainability, I think, you know, in corporate America, they say you never start a project or a thing without thinking about the end first, right? And so when I thought about anew, and I agree with Tim, and I agree with Neil, and in that I think about the end of anew, and anew in 30 years will not be anew today, but anew will be what it is designed to be and fulfill the purpose that God called it to be in the midst of it becoming what God created it to be in the beginning, if that makes sense. My point in saying that is that when I think about anew, and my whole ministry, my whole focus, my whole life has always been about young people. You want to get me excited, just put me in a room with some young people, man. I mean, that excites me to no end. And why is that? Because young people have the passion, and they have the ability to see what is not and to not be afraid of what is. And that's what I like about young people. They're not worried about liturgy. They're not worried about, if you're dressed in a certain, they just don't care, right? And I just think that in these 21st century, in these days, God is calling for a group of folk who will not be intimidated by sharing the gospel and fearful of what will happen on these corners, but yet feel empowered to share the word of Christ in a way that people can receive it. And that's what anew is about. So in 30 years, it may not be what I wanted it to be or created it to be or envisioned it to be today, but it will be what God called it to be.
So we are basically out of time, but I want to give each of you a last comment.
I would simply say that in each generation, we are to tell the story, to interpret it for the people in the community where we are. And so God places us in various communities and various locations, and we should tell the story. It is through the telling of the story that people will learn about Christ and people will come. It is in the telling of the story that people will hear, receive, be healed even. It is in the telling of the story that we will continue to meet the need of people and share the good news. Tell the story.
Amen. And I would say, I think with Shakespeare that said, to thine own self be true, right? And the one thing that I know about young people, and the one thing that I know about folk who are outside of church walls, we call them unchurched or de-churched, is that they're looking for authenticity, and they're not willing to settle or compromise. And so if you're feeling called to do ministry, if you're feeling called to do church ministry or church planting, to thine own self be true, because it's in that authenticity that's going to reach the other person that you're sitting across.
My last words are: don't do it. Don't do this. It's not worth it. I'm just kidding. So people took me so seriously for a second there. One thing I would say that we didn't really mention in terms of like what Root and Branch is about and sort of helping to do is there's a lot of people out there, as you're well aware, who grew up in the church and were hurt by the church or whatever things happen. They're at a place now where they sort of hate the church or like have a very bad association. And one thing that we've tried to provide is like a space, almost like a therapeutic healing space for a lot of people who are in that situation. And we have these meetings and people will just share all these stories about how they grew up this way and how it was harmful for them, and they're trying to discover a new way of understanding God, but it's difficult. And I don't see my role as like being like, well, this is how you should understand God. It's just like listening and hearing them out and showing them that there might be a different way. And I think that's a really important part of, because we're still in a generation where a lot of people did grow up in the church, and that's a blessing in a lot of ways. And so how do we speak to them, and how do we speak to a lot of these people who kind of have some positive feeling about religion, but have been so harmed by it that they can't quite get over it. So healing spaces, therapeutic spaces, I think are important.
I don't know if this is profound enough to be last word, but I would say if you're interested in planting or any kind of ministry that brings people into like any ministry that exists and will continue to exist in the future, it's important to spend a lot of time with non-Christians, with atheists, agnostics, people, whatever, and not just exist as a kind of secret Christian or not bring it up, but find ways to talk about it and sort of not like learn to have those conversations with people. Not necessarily you're trying to convert them or bring them in, but just like in your life. Like have friends who are not Christian and have... at the same time, I think, just that, like in seminary, that can be kind of a thing we forget, maybe. But then the other thing is now I feel like I'm seeking, and I need this more and more, to have a community of people where you can kind of go deeper into the Christian story, and that can help you, like mentors. I think that's sort of what a minister's job is like... someone who becomes really, really fluent, and they have the Christian way of relating and being and thinking about God and experiencing God in them, but they're always in a foreign country. Like they don't take it for granted that everyone else speaks that.
So again, I want to thank our panelists. We want to thank those who are in the room, those who have been streaming this evening. We have gotten some tweets that folks really appreciated the dialogue that we've had in the room. So again, thank you all for coming. Let us just join in a word of prayer. God, for this day, for this time, we say thank you. God, we thank you for drawing your people together in this room, in virtual space. We thank you for those who were here and had to go to class, but we thank you for the conversation where you have allowed us to envision what it is you would have for your people. So be with us. Continue the visioning in our minds that we might do your work in whatever way you see fit for each of us. Be with us as we depart from this place, but never from your presence. Keep your loving arms of protection around your people. I pray this prayer in the name of Jesus, even as others pray in the name of the one by whom they have come to know you. Amen.
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 Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.